Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Chicago, in the heart of the business district. Glass towers reflected the morning sun, illuminating the luxurious offices of Sterling Enterprises, a thriving company ruled with an iron fist by David Sterling, a charismatic but ruthless CEO. The immaculate corridors exuded success, thick carpets, perfectly manicured plants, and carefully curated modern art. Yet, behind this facade of perfection, a ruthless and cruel hierarchy reigned. Ruth Parker, the 42-year-old cleaning lady, pushed her creaking trolley through the company's automatic doors every morning. She was discreet, methodical, and worked without ever seeking recognition. Yet, her world wasn't all dust and rags. Every day, she endured the mockery and contempt of Sterling's managers and assistants. Condescending glances, cutting remarks about her clothes, her accent, or simply her presence, everything was an excuse to belittle her. "Oh look, Ruth's going to drop her bucket again," sneered Jessica Miller, executive assistant, giving a knowing look to her colleagues. David Sterling, sitting in his glass-walled office, watched the scene with a wry smile, convinced that these humiliations were harmless and entertaining. But Ruth didn't see it as mere vexation. She saw and remembered. Every word, every gesture, every injustice was stored in her mind, slowly, patiently. But Ruth was more than just a quiet employee. Behind her calm demeanor and humble gaze lay strategic intelligence and relentless determination. She knew that patience could become power, that every taunt could become a piece of the puzzle of revenge. What appeared to be her weakness, her discretion, her silence, would soon become her greatest weapon. That morning, as the sun streamed through the windows, Ruth pushed her trolley down the corridors, her eyes icy calm observing everything. She knew the day would come when those who had mocked her would pay for their arrogance. And that day was approaching, silent, precise, and irresistible. Every morning, Ruth Parker walked through the doors of Sterling Enterprises with the same unchanging routine. Her trolley creaked softly on the gleaming marble, and the aroma of freshly ground coffee hung in the air. At first glance, she seemed insignificant, a discreet cleaner among the company's elegant and arrogant executives. But every forced smile and every whisper behind her back was registered in her mind, like notes on a musical score she intended to play in due time. The mockery began from the very first moments. "Ruth, have you knocked over your broom again?" she mocked. Jessica Miller, the executive assistant, in stifling a laugh with his colleagues. "Watch out for the bucket, or we'll have to buy you a new one." Office, added Mark Reynolds, an executive at the marketing, raising his eyebrows. Even David Sterling, in his glass-walled office, watched the scene with amusement, convinced that these minor humiliations only served to reinforce his own authority. He was unaware that Ruth didn't just hear the insults. She analyzed them, memorizing every gesture, every word, every flaw in her superior's behavior. Yet Ruth remained polite and silent, performing her work with almost military precision. She cleaned offices, emptied trash cans, prepared meeting rooms, all while remaining invisible to those who despised her. But beneath her apparent calm, an idea was brewing. If she had to endure these humiliations, she might as well transform this daily reality into strength. This strength began with observation. Ruth knew everyone's habits. David Sterling didn't like people touching his files. But he often left them carelessly on his desk. Jessica Miller boasted about her memory but forgot to close certain applications on your computer. Mark Reynolds thought everyone was unaware of his private conversations, even though they were visible to anyone who knew where to look. Little by little, Ruth was weaving her plan. Each day, she identified weaknesses, mistakes, and habits she could exploit. She understood that her superior's arrogance was their greatest weakness. And she knew that one day, that day would come, when what seemed to be her vulnerability would transform into strength. That morning, as she pushed her trolley through the gleaming corridors, Ruth felt a new determination surge through her. The jeers and laughter gave way to a silent anticipation. Every detail was a piece of the puzzle. And she was ready to play the part that would change her life, and the lives of all those who had humiliated her. A few weeks after meticulously observing her superior's every move, Ruth sensed that the moment to act was approaching. She knew she couldn't rush things. Every detail had to be perfect. Every human error she could exploit had to be planned in advance. That morning, while David Sterling was holding a meeting with investors in the large conference room, Ruth entered as usual to clean up after breakfast. The executives, still half asleep or already arrogant, couldn't help but notice her presence. "Ah, Ruth, try not to spill anything this time." Mark Reynolds launched into the joke with a mocking smile. "Yes, or we'll have to buy you a new outfit, again." Exclamation point, added Jessica Miller. Ruth remained silent, her face impassive, but her eyes shone with a determined calm. She knew that every laugh, every mockery, every condescending look was just a step towards her revenge. She began with small manipulations. The screens in the conference room were connected to a centralized presentation software. Ruth, having observed the technician's habits, knew how to discreetly access files. She subtly copied compromising documents, just enough to prepare them to be revealed at the right time. The microphones and speakers were tested by the IT staff before each meeting. Ruth had noticed that they often left the settings at default. She adjusted discreetly transmit the sound so that certain devices can broadcast its low-volume personal notifications, which she could use later to attract attention at the opportune moment. She made sure to note down the words and expressions that David used it to boast about his successes and ridicule the others. These details would be crucial when she presented the true face of its CEO. But Ruth wasn't content with simply preparing the technical groundwork. She began planting seeds of doubt in the managers' minds, lingering glances, seemingly innocuous questions about documents left behind by mistake, remarks about forgotten files. Little by little, an invisible tension settled over the room. The managers began to sense that they were no longer alone, that someone was observing and anticipating their every move. At the end of the meeting, Ruth left the room with her trolley, still silent, still immaculate. But behind this apparent calm, she knew that the moment for her attack was approaching. The mockery and laughter would soon be nothing but a bitter memory for those who had humiliated her. And in the shadows, Ruth smiled. Her revenge would not just be a humiliation. It would be a lesson in power, patience, and justice. The big day had arrived. An extraordinary meeting had been scheduled in the main conference room of Sterling Enterprises. All the senior executives and investors were present. The atmosphere was tense but imbued with confidence. David Sterling, self-assured, thought he was in control of every moment of this meeting. He was unaware that Ruth Parker, the cleaning lady he had considered insignificant, had meticulously prepared every detail for this precise moment. Ruth entered with her cart, as usual, politely greeting a few employees. The mocking comments soon followed. "Ruth, don't drop your rags in front of the investors." Jessica Miller sneered. "Yes, you could ruin our meeting with your talent, usual," added Mark Reynolds, laughing. Ruth did not respond. Her face remained impassive, but inside, every emotion was focused and precise. She knew exactly when and how to strike. As David began his presentation on the company's financial successes, Ruth discreetly activated her first move. The room's screens, connected to the financial files David believed to be secure, began displaying incriminating documents, falsified accounts, suspicious transactions, and internal reports revealing wrongdoing. The investors, initially perplexed, began to murmur amongst themselves, their eyes fixed on David in disbelief. David tried to regain control. It's not what you think, they are old files," he stammered, red with anger and embarrassment. But Ruth had anticipated every reaction. She subtly slipped copies of the documents onto the investors' laptops, ensuring everyone now had access to the evidence. Chaos ensued. The executives panicked, realizing their arrogance and mockery had led to this situation. Then Ruth activated the second move. The microphones and speakers, preset, discreetly played recordings of the daily taunts that the managers and David had hurled at her. The stifled laughter and contemptuous comments echoed through the room, this time directed at themselves. The investors were stunned. The executives, humiliated, didn't know where to hide. David Sterling, used to being in control of every situation, was now completely powerless. His face, usually so self-assured, betrayed his panic. Ruth, calm and dignified, pushed her cart to the center of the hall. The eyes of all those present turned towards her, and in a stunned silence, she declared, "Mr. Sterling, you're fired." A murmur rippled through the room. The investors, impressed by Ruth's audacity and composure, nodded respectfully. The senior executives, on the other hand, were frozen with fear and shame. The woman they had humiliated daily had just overturned their power, transforming their arrogance into their greatest humiliation. Ruth left the room with the same elegance and discipline she had always displayed, leaving behind a mixture of respect, fear, and admiration. Her plan had worked perfectly. The mockery, humiliation, and injustice she had endured were now nothing more than memories of the past. The conference room was plunged into a deafening silence. Investors exchanged incredulous glances, some applauding quietly, others nervously tapping on their laptops to check the documents Ruth had circulated. Senior executives, meanwhile, were frozen, unable to react. CEO David Sterling, red with anger and humiliation, tried to regain his composure, but each attempt failed miserably. Ruth, unperturbed, slowly pushed her trolley toward the exit. Her expression remained calm, almost serene. She knew that true power lay not in titles or luxurious offices, but in knowledge and patience. The mockery and humiliation she had endured for years had just culminated in a complete victory. Investors, aware of David's corruption and blunders, took immediate action. He was dismissed from his position, suspended from the company, and an internal audit was launched to assess the extent of the wrongdoing. Senior managers, whether complicit or passive, were also summoned to answer for their actions. Rumors about the incident spread rapidly, and Ruth became a figure of both respect and fear within Sterling Enterprises. Jessica Miller and Mark Reynolds, who had laughed so much at his clumsiness, finally understood the extent of their arrogance. Their clumsy apologies couldn't erase the public humiliation they had just suffered. Ruth, for her part, didn't seek personal revenge. Her goal had been justice, and she had achieved it calmly and strategically. In the days that followed, Ruth was invited to participate in board meetings, not as a cleaner, but as a consultant on internal management and transparency. Her keen observation skills, patience, and strategic intelligence had transformed her position within the company. What had seemed to be her greatest weakness, her status as a cleaner, had become her most powerful asset. Leaving her office, now sporting a consultant's badge and the respect of everyone, Ruth finally allowed herself a smile. She had shown that dignity and patience could overthrow even the most arrogant power. Yesterday's mockery was nothing but a memory. Today, she was free, respected, and invincible.